This issue of Simon Ekpa and Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, the wind that is blowing globally all over the world and telling the world what is really going on in Nigeria. This issue of Simon Ekpa being imprisoned in Finland, the AU and the other African leaders, they have come up to tell the Finland government that they should release Simon Ekpa, that he is calling for independence and he have the right to seek for uh, to seek for uh, f- um, um, to seek for determination of his state if he wants to. So it is not a way to prison him or a way to jail him in the name of his calling for a Biafran state. So they have tell the Finland government that they should release him, and the time have passed when they used to use the foreign powers to oppress the African people. The time have gone, so there is no need of still keeping him in detention. And this issue of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, they also talk about it because they say that the Nigerian government also they should release Mazi Nnamdi Kanu because this video, it contains a lot of information and a lot of things that is happening between the Nigerian government and the AU, ECOWAS and other world, because this is the meeting which they have in at Addis Ababa, the center of Africa. So they made a meeting and they speak a lot of things which both Ibrahim Traore and the other world power, they also speak in this meeting. So I would like you to watch it to the end. Don't skip any part of it. Try to watch it to the end. And as you're watching, like, subscribe, and make sure you share it to go around for everyone to see what is really happening in Biafra land. And thank you for watching.
The government of Finland has shown a clear sign of readiness to release Simon Ekpa, following growing diplomatic pressure from the African Union and a united chorus of African leaders demanding justice and fairness. After weeks of strong statements from African capitals and mounting calls from civil society groups across the continent, Finnish authorities have begun reassessing the situation surrounding Simon Ekpa, the Biafran activist whose name has drawn attention both within and beyond Africa. According to official diplomatic sources, the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs has opened formal consultations with representatives of the African Union mission to the European Union in Brussels. These discussions focus on addressing what many African leaders describe as the unjust treatment of African voices calling for self-determination. The message from Africa has been firm, unified, and consistent. Simon Ekpa and Mazi Nnamdi Kanu are not criminals. They are individuals advocating for freedom and justice, values recognized under both the United Nations Charter and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. The turning point came after an extraordinary African Union session in Addis Ababa, where several heads of state, notably Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, and President William Ruto of Kenya, made a collective declaration urging Finland to release Simon Ekpa and reaffirming Africa's moral responsibility to defend its own citizens abroad. The AU communiqué emphasized that Africa could no longer remain silent while legitimate demands for justice were met with restrictions or persecution. The joint statement delivered by the AU's diplomatic envoy to Helsinki was clear and uncompromising. It read, "The African Union stands in solidarity with its sons and daughters who seek peaceful means to express their right to self-determination. The detention or restriction of Simon Ekpa undermines international law and contradicts Finland's long-standing image as a defender of freedom and democracy." This diplomatic message carried the weight of an entire continent. Finland, a country that prides itself on human rights and fairness, could not ignore the voice of the African Union, especially when the call was supported by multiple African governments and echoed by their citizens across social media, local assemblies, and global advocacy groups. Soon after the AU's official message reached Helsinki, a senior Finnish Foreign Ministry spokesperson confirmed that Finland had received Africa's concerns with respect and seriousness. The spokesperson further explained that the government was reviewing the matter in the light of international human rights standards, and acknowledged that Finland values its long-standing partnership with Africa. This diplomatic response, though measured, marked a major shift. For years, Many African activists living abroad had felt ignored or dismissed by European governments when they raised political issues related to Africa. But this time, the situation was different. Africa was united, confident, and determined to protect one of its own. Inside Finland, human rights organizations began to support the African position. Groups such as the Finnish League for Human Rights and Amnesty International Finland publicly called for transparency and fairness in Simon EKPA's case. They argued that no individual should face legal or political persecution for advocating peace, freedom, or the rights of his people. Their statements added moral pressure on the Finnish government to act in line with its international commitments. In Africa, the reaction to Finland's willingness to listen was immediate. Captain Ibrahim Traoré described it as a new chapter in African diplomacy. He stated that the era of ignoring African concerns was over and that every African leader now has a duty to stand up for the dignity of Africans everywhere. President Ramaphosa echoed this sentiment, saying that the African Union's unity had finally proven that Africa can defend its citizens beyond its borders through diplomacy, not dependency. Meanwhile, President William Ruto emphasized that the case of Simon EKPA was not only about one man but about the principle of justice itself. He stated that Finland's responsiveness was a welcome example of international cooperation built on mutual respect. Ruto noted that if the world respects freedom of speech and human rights, then those principles must also apply to Africans without exception. The diplomatic channels between Helsinki and the African Union remain active, with both sides committed to resolving the matter peacefully. Reports from EU diplomatic circles suggest that Finland's government is preparing a formal statement to clarify Simon EKPA's legal situation and outline next steps toward a resolution that aligns with human rights law. Observers across Europe and Africa view Finland's openness as a direct result of Africa's firm but respectful diplomatic approach. Unlike past situations where African concerns were fragmented, this effort demonstrated a unified and coordinated strategy, a hallmark of the new Africa that Captain Traoré and others have been calling for. At the same time, grassroots support for the cause continues to grow. Across African cities, from Lagos to Nairobi, from Accra to Johannesburg, civil society groups, students, and Pan-African movements have been organizing peaceful demonstrations and online campaigns under hashtags such as #FreeSimonEKPA, #AfricaUnite, and #JusticeForBiafra. These actions have amplified the diplomatic voice of the African Union, sending a clear signal that ordinary Africans are fully behind their leaders' call for justice. Political analysts believe Finland's readiness to respond positively is not just a legal matter but also a symbolic acknowledgement of Africa's growing diplomatic strength. The world is beginning to see Africa not just as a collection of developing nations but as a unified voice capable of influencing international decisions. The message from the African Union remains firm. Simon EKPA did not commit a crime. He exercised his right to speak for his people and advocate for peaceful self-determination. The AU maintains that such actions fall within the boundaries of international law and that silencing such voices is contrary to the global principles Finland itself upholds. As consultations continue, hopes are high across Africa that Finland's next announcement will confirm Simon EKPA's full release and restoration of his rights. The African Union's diplomatic success in pushing this agenda has already sent a powerful message across the world, that Africa has found its collective strength, and when it speaks with one voice, even global powers listen. In this new chapter of African diplomacy, Finland's response represents more than just compliance with a request. It symbolizes mutual respect between continents and recognition that African lives, voices, and rights deserve the same level of dignity as anyone else. The unity displayed by the African Union marks a defining moment, one where Africa's silence has finally turned into strength, and its collective voice is now shaping global decisions. Following Finland's diplomatic response and readiness to review Simon EKPA's case, African leaders have intensified their stance, showing rare unity and determination. Across African capitals, the reaction has been one of approval and renewed purpose. Leaders who once spoke cautiously are now speaking with full conviction. Africa, they say, will no longer allow its people to be silenced or mistreated, whether at home or abroad. At the heart of this movement stands Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, who has emerged as one of the most consistent voices for African self-determination. In a firm statement broadcast from Ouagadougou, Traoré declared that Africa's position is not a plea but a demand for respect and justice. He stated that Simon EKPA and Mazi Namdi Kanu have done nothing to deserve detention or restriction, as their struggle represents the legitimate aspirations of millions who want freedom through peaceful means. Traore's words were echoed by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, who said that the Finnish government's willingness to cooperate with the African Union was a positive step toward global fairness. Ramaphosa stressed that Africa has matured diplomatically and will no longer accept double standards in how freedom and human rights are applied. If freedom of expression and political opinion are protected in Europe, he said, then they must also be respected for Africans who raise their voices for justice. Kenya's President William Ruto reinforced that message during a joint press briefing in Nairobi. He stated that the unity displayed by African nations over Simon Ekpa's case is a reflection of the continent's growing political confidence. Africa is now in a position to stand for its citizens with courage and clarity, Ruto said. We are not opposing any country, but we are reminding the world that fairness must have one standard, not two. Other African leaders have joined in strong support. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo praised Finland for acknowledging Africa's concerns, saying it shows that diplomacy can achieve what confrontation never could. Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan called the development a breakthrough for African dignity, noting that this could open the door for similar cooperation on other human rights issues. Senegal's President Bassirou Diomaye Faye added that it was time for Africa to create a consistent policy for defending its citizens globally, especially those involved in peaceful activism. In Addis Ababa, the African Union Commission released an updated statement confirming that it would continue to engage with Finland until Simon Ekpa's release is fully guaranteed. The Commission's spokesperson emphasized that the case is not only about one man but about the principle that Africans should not be punished for demanding their rights peacefully. The spokesperson added that the AU's position is grounded in both international law and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which guarantees the right to self-determination for all peoples. The AU also used this moment to highlight the case of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, calling on Nigeria to act in the same spirit of fairness. In the words of one AU delegate, if Finland can respect Africa's call for justice, then Nigeria must also listen. We cannot call for freedom abroad and ignore the same cry within our own borders. The statement resonated strongly across the continent, drawing wide support from civil society, faith leaders, and youth movements who see this as the beginning of a new moral awakening in Africa. Across African cities, public support for the AU's position continues to grow. Peaceful demonstrations, online campaigns, and community gatherings have become a daily occurrence. Movements like the Pan-African Solidarity Forum, Voices of the Youth for Justice, and Africa Rising Coalition have organized statements and solidarity marches. Their central message is simple: Africa's unity must now translate into action. Political analysts describe this moment as a turning point in Africa's foreign policy identity. For decades, the continent has been seen as divided and reactive. But now, through the unified call for Simon Ekpa's release, Africa is presenting a new image, one of proactive diplomacy, collective responsibility, and strategic coordination. The involvement of multiple presidents from different regions of the continent, from west to east and south, has made the message impossible to dismiss. In their latest joint communiqué, the leaders reaffirmed 4 key principles. Africa must protect its citizens globally. No African activist or journalist should face unfair treatment abroad for exercising rights recognized under international law. Dialogue, not detention, is the path to peace. Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu's cases should be resolved through understanding, not punishment. Self-determination is a human right. Africans have the same right as any other people to discuss their political future peacefully. African unity is non-negotiable. When Africa speaks together, the world must listen. The African Union Peace and Security Council has since held special consultations to coordinate further diplomatic follow-ups. Plans are being made for an AU delegation to visit both Finland and Nigeria, ensuring that the cases of Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu are treated in line with international human rights standards. Observers note that the AU's coordinated stance has elevated Africa's global standing. Western governments and international organizations are watching closely, realizing that Africa's influence is growing not through confrontation, but through organized diplomacy. The message is powerful: a united Africa can no longer be ignored in global affairs. Within Finland, government sources reportedly described the AU's tone as measured but firm, noting that it reflected a continent confident in its voice and conscious of its rights. The Finnish government has welcomed the dialogue, acknowledging that mutual respect between Africa and Europe is essential for future cooperation. As these developments unfold, African citizens continue to express pride in the decisive leadership of figures like Traore, Ramaphosa, Ruto, and others who have stood publicly for justice. Across social media and in African media outlets, the phrase "Africa is awake" has become a slogan for the new diplomatic era. This chapter of Africa's involvement in Simon Ekpa's case is more than political. It is deeply symbolic. It shows a continent learning to speak for itself, united across regions and ideologies, defending its sons with dignity. It also demonstrates a shift in how Africa is perceived internationally, from passive observer to active negotiator. The unity shown by African leaders proves that Africa's power lies in its collective will. The calls for Simon Ekpa's freedom are not merely about one man's case. They are about setting a standard that will protect every African voice that stands for justice. As Captain Ibrahim Traore said in his final remarks after the AU session, Africa has spoken clearly. We will defend our people wherever they are. Justice for one African is justice for all Africans. This statement captures the new direction Africa has taken: strong, coordinated, and ready to act whenever its people's rights are at stake. The movement that began with a call for Simon Ekpa's freedom has now become a wider message of unity, pride, and responsibility. With Finland now showing readiness to release Simon Ekpa, a new wave of optimism is spreading across Africa and among Biafran supporters worldwide. The African Union's unified diplomatic action has not only opened the door for Ekpa's freedom but also restored confidence in the power of collective African leadership. For the first time in many years, Africa has demonstrated that it can influence global decisions through unity, respect, and firm negotiation. The next step is already in motion. The African Union Peace and Mediation Delegation is preparing to visit both Helsinki and Abuja to ensure that the cases of Simon Ekpa and Mazi Nnamdi Kanu are handled justly and in line with international human rights principles. The delegation will include representatives from Burkina Faso, South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Tanzania, and Senegal, along with members of the African Union Commission on Human and People's Rights. Their mission is clear: to secure Simon Ekpa's full release, push for Nnamdi Kanu's freedom, and begin meaningful dialogue on the future of the Biafran question. The African Union's new approach focuses on diplomacy, dialogue, and justice rather than confrontation. In their official statement, the AU made it clear that Africa's strength lies in resolving African problems through African solutions. They emphasized that the issue of Biafra should no longer be treated as a criminal matter but as a legitimate political and humanitarian question that requires open dialogue. Across Europe and Africa, the momentum continues to grow. Finland's positive engagement has encouraged other nations to support Africa's position. Several members of the European Parliament have expressed agreement with the African Union's call for fairness, noting that peaceful advocacy should never be criminalized. Human rights organizations in Finland, Norway, and Germany have publicly commended the AU's efforts, calling it a model for how Africa and Europe can cooperate based on mutual respect. Inside Nigeria, reactions are mixed but hopeful. Many Nigerians, both within and outside the southeast region, see the development as a chance for peace and reconciliation. Civil society groups and religious leaders have appealed to the Nigerian government to welcome the AU delegation with open arms and listen to their recommendations. They argue that releasing Nnamdi Kanu and engaging in dialogue could end years of tension, reduce insecurity in the region, and rebuild trust between the government and the people. For Biafran supporters around the world, this moment feels like the beginning of change. The long struggle for recognition and justice has finally caught the attention of Africa's most powerful institutions. The message from the AU, backed by strong leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traore, Cyril Ramaphosa, and William Ruto, has given them renewed hope that the world is finally listening. Social media platforms are filled with messages of encouragement under hashtags like #FreeSimonEkpa, #FreeNamdeKanu, and #Biafra must be free. Analysts describe the AU's success in influencing Finland as a diplomatic milestone. It shows that Africa, once seen as silent or divided, can now speak with one voice and achieve results without foreign interference.
Wow, this is a very great news. That is the kind of news we would like to be hearing, because the time have come when the world, when African need to rise up on their feet, so that let other world all those European countries. They should not be using them like a puppet. So I believe that the Finland government, they will listen and they will do the needful, because the issue of still holding Simon Ekpa, it is due to what Nigerian government paid them. But those days have gone. Everybody have seen the main thing. The Biafran people is agitating to leave Nigeria because of injustice, maltreatment, and sidelining in everything happening in the country. So I would like to hear your comments down below. Like, subscribe, and make sure you share the video to go around. Let everyone see what is really going on in Nigeria. And thank you for watching.